Hello, Vladimir. Nice
Hello.
to meet you, Minister.
Cristina Salmena from Airbnb.
Dimitri. Χρόνια πολλά. Στο Δημήτρη.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's first roundtable. For the next 45 or so minutes, we'll be discussing short-term rentals, shaping policy, and shaping innovation. We have a full house here, and we have 5 very distinguished panelists, starting with Minister Theoharis, who is the Deputy Minister for Economy and Finance in the Hellenic Republic. We'll be discussing policy, of course. And then we'll have Mr. Vladimir Beroun, who's the Senior Public Policy Manager in the EU for Airbnb. So once more, policy, but on a pan-European level. Professor George Doukidis, who's professor at the Athens University of Economics and Business, with a lot of insights to share. Cristina Salmena, who is the Public Policy Associate for Italy and Southern Europe for Airbnb, and will be discussing the Greek market and the Greek perspective. And last but not least, our distinguished founder and president of the Hellenic Property Federation, Mr. Stratos Paradias, who has a long time knowledge and I'd say the deepest knowledge of the property market from the owner's perspective.
He's an institution all on his own, I think.
So starting with the institutions, I'd like to commence the discussion with Mr. Theoharis. So, Minister, we're discussing taxes, and we know we can't escape them, but we have a lot to discuss about them. So we have a new tax legislation on the line, and it's expected to bring changes to the short-term rentals framework as well,
yes.
as well as other things. So what are the main elements of these changes? And, to put it on point, will we see a hard limit of 90 days per year per property for short-term rentals?
Sure. Well, let me first of all start by expressing my thanks for the kind invitation to explain the current framework, the current thinking. We are at a juncture, you mentioned it, Dimitri, that this is the time where we have made already the announcements, but the actual legislation has not been tabled yet. We are about to bring it, first of all, to the Ministers' Council and then to the public for consultation. And after that, we should be moving quickly to enable the legislation and table it and vote for it in the Parliament. So a few things are known, or most of things are known, but clarifications are always in order. Now, the first thing I would like to say is that here, short-term rental, we have to balance a lot of competing issues and a lot of competing policy objectives, and a lot of constituencies that have different kind of interests. We know that we have issues with property supply in Greece, and I'm sure Mr. Doukidis will talk about that and talk about how short-term rental has helped or not helped in that respect. I'm sure his view will be positive, but I'll be waiting anxiously to hear him. But we also have issues about the rental levels and whether there's competition among tourists and locals and all that thing, the different kind of long-term, short-term rentals and what kind of competition dynamics we see there. And of course, we have the background policy objectives of fiscal prudence, of ensuring that we have a base that's known, there's no tax evasion, or we limit tax evasion as much as we can, and in general, to ensure that we keep our budget within the right framework, and we have stability on the fiscal side. So what we have opted to do, final objective, of course, is a competition with the tourism industry and the short-term rental industry. So what we opted to do is to try to use the levers of taxation as a soft power towards shaping the environment the way we would like it to do. So to answer very categorically your question, no hard limits, okay? We will not be instituting any hard limits, 90 days or otherwise. What we're doing is first clarifying exactly the market. So we will open a new NISA code to ensure that we have the short-term rental industry categorized within our statistics on its own. Number two, toughen up and define what a short-term rental is. That's where we introduce the 60-day limit as a short-term rental, but this is just to categorize a specific agreement, whether it falls under the short-term purview or the more long-term rental purview. So there has been some speculation whether this is the hard limit. It's not. It's just that every a rental of 3 months, 4 months, etc., does not fall under the remit of the legislation that we will pass. So that's the first change. The second change is that we would like to allow the individuals to continue supplementing their income with a sort of hassle-free short-term rental regime. We are allowing them to continue operating the way they have been, with no VAT, with no local taxes, etc. We will be introducing the so-called resilience taxation, a taxation that is being increased to ensure that we fund our resilience fund, because we have seen this year that the resilience funds are not adequate in the current climate. We see fires and floods and other events that require a much bigger envelope to be assigned for that. So we will be introducing that. We're doing it, though, because the likes of Airbnb and the rest of the platforms are able to collect it as well. This is a well-known local tax type of overnight stay tax. So this is something that can be collected, so we still keep the hassle-free environment for the individuals. And finally, we are putting a hard limit, so I'm contradicting myself now. We're putting a hard limit on 2 properties for that, which effectively covers about 70% of the short-term rental market, and we're forcing anyone above the two properties to open up books and basically register with the tax authority. By doing that, they enter the regime of VAT taxation, local taxation, and of course the resilience, climate resilience tax. So basically, we are professionalizing the market. That's how we view it. We're equalizing the level playing field between the tourism industry that does pay VAT, but has also extra stipulations and stuff which we're not, for the time being, introducing. And finally, we're also introducing a few more changes, like ensuring that a single building cannot be disguised as a short-term rental. We've seen this, that whole buildings are being effectively used as hotels, but actually utilizing the short-term rental to avoid any Ministry of Tourism regulations that should be applied. So basically, that's a framework. I think it's a very clear incremental vis-a-vis the current regime framework. So we need to ensure that we don't rock the market too much. Short-term rental has benefits as well. We need to keep it as a tool for people to supplement their income. But we need to ensure that this is done in a framework that's not rampant and out of control.
Thank you very much, Minister. And the journalist in me is very happy. We made news today, sure. And it's going to spread. So a lot of things to discuss and a lot of things to put into our conversation. What you said has definitely impact all over the sector. So moving on to Mr. Beroun, we discussed Greece, but I'd like us to discuss Europe as well. Mm-hmm. So given your experience from Brussels, where do we stand in terms of regulation on a pan-European issue? Because short-term rentals is not just a Greek issue, it's a pan-European issue. So where does Brussels stand?
Thank you so much for this question, Dimitris. So let me start by recognizing that the discussions about the future of short-term rental regulation at the EU level are actually not new to EU policymakers in Brussels. In fact, it was already in 2016 when the European Commission has drafted an agenda for the collaborative economy, which in fact has outlined a number of recommendations and policy guidelines for regulators to take into account when it comes to addressing the short-term rental regulation in the member states. But at the same time, besides, for instance, local regulations, our hosts on the Airbnb platform are also subject to a number of European regulations, such as the European Services Directive, which provides certain limits and sort of kind of operation modus for these hosts in order to sort of enter the single European market. And for us as a platform, we're also subject to a number of EU-level regulations, such as the e-commerce directive, GDPR for privacy, but also the latest Digital Services Act. However, as you can tell, this is basically, I would say, quite a, I don't want to say patchwork, but it's a number of different regulations, and there has never been sort of a dedicated piece of legislation at the EU level that would in fact address STRs, the short-term rental industry. And that is actually changing now. So last year, in November 2022, the European Commission has proposed a regulation on data collection and sharing pertaining to the sector of short-term rentals. And this is actually a pivotal, seminal piece of legislation that is currently being finalized in Brussels. Actually, right now as we speak, there is a final sort of set of technical and political discussions called as a trilogue between the European Commission, members of the Parliament and the Council representing the member states that actually are just finalizing the text. We expect the final version of this text to be published probably at the end of this year, and then there is a 2-year period or up to 24 months period for member states to in fact implement it. So as you can tell from the name of the regulation, it's actually quite a narrow regulation. It actually looks primarily into introducing transparency and empowering thereby local regulatory authorities to regulate with data. That's really important because we believe, and we also welcome this regulation, because we believe that it will in fact give more visibility to local authorities, that then they can also draft regulations that are proportionate, fit for purpose, and they're actually based on evidence, based on real data, and not on emotions and sentiments. When it comes to the content of the regulation specifically, so it actually has 2 main components with different responsibilities and obligations that are actually quite smartly shared between the local authorities, but also our hosts, but also us as platforms. And let me explain you now what these components are. So the first component is in fact a process that is being introduced as to basically ask our hosts to register with the local authorities. There is a definition of the process, how it should look like. So it should, for instance, be automatic. It should be ideally online, free of charge. It should be accessible, automated. And when these hosts will get their registration number, we, the platforms, will also enforce it. So we will request our hosts to put the number on their profile, and then we will do, according to EU regulations, random checks against a publicly published registry of these numbers, so to make sure that that we sort of minimize potential fraud issues. So that's one component. The second component pertains to data sharing. So as long as member states introduce a proportionate registration scheme, they can also request platforms to share data. And that's actually the seminal part of this regulation. There will be a process whereby member states will build an agency or a special authority that will be called as a single digital entry point. It will basically build a technical framework. We call it an API, so basically a language, an interface for platforms to connect to and then share activity host data with that authority or that sort of entry point every month, basically. So this will allow these authorities to have really a good overview, and also for like destination marketing organizations, for instance, to also understand what exactly is happening in that specific country on the short-term rental sort of business side. So in principle, this regulation is really an addition to what local authorities can already do, and it should also empower them to properly regulate.
Thank you very much for this broad overview, but also on the point and on point discussion about regulation, and I guess we can't have regulation without having data and without having insights. And I guess the perfect man in the room to discuss those things is Professor Doukidis. Since you completed just a few months ago, the summer 23, you completed the research on STR in Greece, and so you were the project manager in this study. So given your experience and given the insights, can you elaborate on the impact and the contributions of the short-term rental to the Greek economy in particular?
Okay, thank you, Dimitris. In our research center at the business school, we undertake various studies in the last 20, 25 years on e-commerce, e-business, but also on electronic platforms like Airbnb. So this study actually focused on the impact that electronic platforms had on STRs, short-term rental, but also the impact of STR in the local economy and local society. Just to give you some figures, those are 2022 figures, but presumably 2023 are similar, probably better. So in 2023, STRs offer some 29 million nights to the tourism sector, which is almost 22% of total guest nights in Greece. So it's a big part of the tourism sector. In terms of revenue, they generated something like 1.5 billion euros. And if we add also the expenses of the tourism when they come to the place, then the revenue actually goes to 3.5 billion euros. Also, we identified the impact on the GDP, which we identified that it's about 1.6, 1.7% of the GDP, which is a good figure. And if we take some multipliers from KEPE or AUEB, which are well-accepted economic institutions in Greece, then that impact can even go up to 3.5% of the GDP. So STRs are an integral and I think very important part of this sector, but also for the Greek economy. So behind those very hard financial KPIs, let me also mention a few other figures which actually highlight the importance of STRs. First of all, STRs in Greece are dispersed throughout Greece. Attica has only 20% of the nights. So we're talking about rural areas and semi-urban areas, which is also very important. Second, STRs in Greece are owned by individuals. 93% of the total night spent is in accommodation with less than 10 bed places. So actually, mainly we're talking about individuals. 90% of those individuals, our study identified that they do it for revenue purposes, either as an extra revenue or the only revenue they have. And something which relates to the discussions we had in this conference is that 50% of those use the revenue for sustainability for their houses. This is very important of the real estate sector. Actually, there was a lot of discussions about this in this conference. So this is something that we forget, that some of the revenue that they get is actually to make their houses more sustainable. And last but not least is that the majority of users, because now I talked about the suppliers, the users believe that STRs actually improve the quality of life in the neighborhood, because this is a topic also that it has been discussed widely in the Greek press, and only something like 10% believe the opposite. So we have some very hard financial KPIs who show the importance of this sector in tourism, but also to the Greek economy, but also some other figures that actually underline the importance of this sector to actually parts of the society which probably are not very privileged. So I very much like what the minister said about this in a sense. He implied it in his answer. So that's
so very insightful data, and you helped us paint a picture of what short-term rental in Greece is actually about, because there's a lot of discussion and a lot of vagueness about that.
And let me add also the 700 million in taxes, which I think is very good, because this market is actually, some years ago, it was not evidenced in tax payment, and the 55,000 jobs which are created directly or indirectly. So it's not only the GDPs and the revenue, but also there are other KPIs. So sorry about it.
So you actually helped me bring on the discussion for Mrs. Salmena, and we heard that from, may I say, an academic point of view, but let's talk business. Let's talk about Airbnb in Greece. So what is the status of your presence in Greece and in comparison with what Professor Doukidis said? Because I guess you have the majority share in this market. And also, in what ways are you collaborating with the local authorities in terms of short-term rentals regulation? And we have Minister here, so please be honest.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dimitris, and let me thank you, the Minister Theoharis, for being here during this discussion today, and even thank you to Professor Doukidis and President Paradias, because I think that it's quite important to have these different points of view sitting together to, underline and having, enrich the dialogue between institutions, industry, association, academics. So it's very important. Starting from your last part of the question, Airbnb has always stood alongside Greek institutions and public authorities, trying to foster tourism and help in growing at the local level, all the tourism sector. So we know how important tourism and accommodations are for Greece, accounting up to 18.5% of GDP in 2022, so a huge amount of the GDP. And in order to have a strong tourism system, we think that it's important to combine various tourist accommodations. Short-term rentals are important in this sense, even because they complement the traditional hospitality offer that the country already has. Also, it's important to underline how much short-term rentals are important for Greek families. According to a survey, an internal survey we ran among our hosts in September, the main reasons why Greek families decide to open their own homes to short-term rentals are linked to financial needs, such as make ends meet or covering growing cost of living. 80% of the respondents said that they use short-term rental to integrate their salary, and that's a huge percentage of our hosts. This is for all these reasons that we started working with Greek institutions, with the Independent Authority for Public Revenues, and in 2021 we signed a Memorandum of Understanding together with Booking.com and Expedia Group, so the whole industry, with the tax authority. And this agreement is being successfully being implemented right now. And we renewed it last month, so it's a huge agreement, and it's a best practice across Europe. This agreement foresees, first of all, the mandatory national registration, then a mandatory permit field on all platforms, meaning that no one can host on the platforms today without having permission from the government. So this is very important. And it foresees even data sharing between platforms and the government to allow government, tax authority in this case, to do fiscal controls. And a notice and take down procedure, that means that authority share a list of non-compliant listing to the platforms, and the platforms need to take down these uncompliant listings from every platforms. As the governor of tax authority, Mr. Pizzilli, said, but even Mr. Theoharis last month, this agreement is super important, and it's important because thanks to it, from the 60 million euros declared as income in 2017, they reached 540 million in 2022. And as mentioned before, considering the trend, they expect to exceed 700 million this year. So a huge amount in tax revenues, and it's super important. As I mentioned before, this agreement is a best practice across Europe. Greece is a pioneer in the region because it's the only country right now that has this kind of mix of data sharing and national registration that is free online for every person that wants to be in this market, and it's huge. Also, it represents a balanced approach to regulation, as it protects families who do hosting to make ends meet, while fostering tourism and ensures transparency and a level play field between the industry. So it's quite useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights. And last but not least, Mr. Paradias, well, the minister did make news today. So in our pre-discussion, we were thinking more on a theoretical level of what the impacts of these changes are, but the minister actually has put things on the line. So do you believe that the regulatory changes in the short-term rental frameworks will bring the desired effect?
You're talking about the ones that the ministry will put in place.
Exactly.
Well, it's not going to be the end of the world. I was very happy to hear the minister saying that he's not going to put a limit of the 90 days, which is persistently demanded by the hotel industry. This would be a suicidal move if we would move this way, for many reasons. First of all, part of our society is suffering from a micromegalism. We believe that we have so much tourism that we can behave like Barcelona, which has millions and millions of tourists. We have not reached that level, and I don't know how many years we're going to reach this. So we have to protect this kind of activity for the good and for the sake of our society and of our economy. It is almost 1 o'clock, but at 6 o'clock this afternoon, my German vice president in the International Union of Property Owners, the president of House and Grund, is flying to Athens for his weekly school vacations with his wife and 2 children. And when I asked him which hotel is he staying, he said, "Are you crazy? I cannot afford paying 2 hotel rooms. I got an Airbnb and a small apartment in Saronida where I will spend this week. I cannot afford paying this hotel." So this is a kind of tourism which cannot be ignored, and which is at least 22% of the people who are coming into Greece. How can we fight against this? How can we? It's suicidal to try to create problems to the people who are doing all this. For my part, from the people I represent, I've known so many people who had paid their loans by getting into this industry. A lot of people who have modernized their house, and a lot of people who are paying regularly their taxes, Mr. Taxman, Mr. Theoharis. When we're talking about taxes, such a broad smile. So we cannot ignore all that just because we're being pushed to take measures against something which is not that big, it's not that annoying, it's something vital for the society. And for those who think that the Airbnb creates a problem in the main domicile market for the people who want to live in the cities, I will just say that it's a very small fragment of this contribution to this problem. The main problem why we have this imbalance in the offer and the demand for main domicile is due, firstly, to the fact that our houses are getting older and older. And it takes a fortune to modernize them, which the Greek family, which has created them back in the 50s and the 60s, does not have the money today to support their renovation. Also, another one is the uncertainty of some tenants with between brackets, who come to our houses with the purpose to pay nothing absolutely and be kicked out whenever we can do it. And this defames all the other tenants who are working hard to comply with their obligations. And lastly, due to the high taxation, the high revenue taxation, which is added up to ENFIA, if the government of a country which does not have not a single unit to offer in social housing would like to intervene, it can change the scenery in one night by cutting to half the taxation, the income taxation. You will not lose any money, Minister, because the new rentals will all be declared and you'll get taxes from all of them. So it's in your hands exclusively to do it and cut down the and make this initiative and show the people the right way. Then they will see people, along with the other schemes that the government is putting in place, like the renovations or the loans for those who would like to buy their houses, especially the young generation. This will all help to overcome this problem within a very short time.
Thank you, Mr. Paradias. And moving to the second round of questions, although we don't have a hard limit on Airbnb, we do have a hard limit on time.
Sure.
So I'd like to ask you to be briefer than the first round. And Minister, let me ask a more political question. Okay, we discussed all these changes, they're very important, but on a political level, your government has been re-elected on the premise of limiting the impacts of inflation to the public. And we have to agree that short-term rentals have a significant impact on the cost of living in a number of areas. So how do you balance between these two?
It's a difficult balance. Mr. Paradias, I know him for 15 years. Whenever we meet, he always asks for cutting of taxes. So has not disappointed me this time around as well. So thank you for that. Of course, this is not just the rental market that has an impact on the cost of living, but it's a significant and important issue. This government, and I mean this administration for 5 years now, is the only administration that has actually looked into that issue. The market has, expanded with the ebbs and flows, with the cycles of boom and bust, but there has not been a lot of intervention in terms of ensuring that we have adequate housing and we keep somehow the housing inflation under control. So we have come from a period where we had many issues. The financial crisis was very, very much severe on the housing market and on the people owning property. As a result, it was important for the government to ensure that the visa schemes and other schemes were rekindling the real estate market, and I'm very glad that this has now been materialized and has happened. But now we see areas of overheating and issues that we need to be doing, and also we see social issues. We see young people not being able to afford a house on their own. That has many ramifications, many implications for the demographics and for a number of issues that are very, very important and sometimes crucially important for the future of this country. As a result, we have taken a number of measures to limit the visa scheme, increase the limits to 500,000 to be able to obtain a visa. We have created programs like My House to allow young couples and young single people, girls and boys, to be able to get loans from the banks, subsidized in terms of the interest rate. We're also pumping a lot of money. 1.5 billion is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kathimerini front page news today, in social housing, in PPPs, public-private partnerships, to ensure that we renovate the stock and be able to provide it for correct prices. So I think this is a very complex issue, but there are a lot of initiatives underway, and we will be watching the space to ensure that if we need to change the mix, we will do so.
Thank you very much, Minister. And once again, back to Brussels. Mr. Beroun, we discussed the pan-European regulation, but there's an actual question on this one. Will it stay on paper, or could it be applicable across member states, including Greece? Or is it a theoretical discussion, or is it something actual down the line? And please limit your answer to something like 2 minutes.
Perfect, will do. Thank you, Dimitris. So, in fact, when I introduced this EU short-term rental regulation, I hope I haven't created a sort of a flawed a conclusion that a job done and we don't have to deal with this anymore. Actually, this is where the job really starts, because that's the sort of post-legislative implementation part. And in fact, as I already mentioned, member states will have up to 24 months to introduce pieces, both components of this regulation at the national level. So all the member states will have to, for instance, update, revise, or introduce new registration schemes that are compatible with the EU STR regulation. They will also have to revise their data sharing processes or introduce this new single digital entry point in order to get data from platforms. So there is lots of work. And in fact, we're here also to help the governments. We already have really fantastic collaboration and a good case study built in Greece. But of course, there is other 27 member states altogether at the EU. So we have to actually also make this regulation work in practice. And what it means to us is that we are actually hoping to work with governments in order to, for instance, help create a national or sort of a pan-European API framework, so some sort of a form of a technical communication between all of the member states and the digital platforms that actually can be easily implemented. Imagine, like for us, as a big platform, it actually takes quite a while to connect to a technical interface. And imagine there is thousands of small platforms with very few employees that actually operate in this business, and they will also have to comply. So we want to make sure that it's not, just us being able to do it, but actually also our smaller partners, smaller competitors, smaller platforms. In addition to it, we also want to make sure that the regulation ultimately leads to the positive outcomes that we were hoping for. The scope, as I said, is pretty much narrow, but the ultimate goal of the European Commission is to actually address local regulations in the way that governments or cities or authorities take informed decisions based on the data they get from us. So it is actually just point one. It's really just a starting point that informs what the future regulations will look like. Greece has already made up your mind quite significantly, but there is a bunch of other countries that still haven't really defined their regulations. So hopefully this will also help to sort of help our hosts. And in fact, if we look at the numbers, we have 1.4 million hosts in Europe, and 1.1 have only one listing, one home listed on Airbnb. So those are occasional hosts that cannot deal with professional rules. They want to have defined rules that actually are proportionate, evidence-based, and also justifying basically the level of the activity.
Thank you very much. And moving back to Professor Doukidis and back to your research, I would like to ask you, is there a correlation between short-term rentals and specific needs of the Greek society and economy? What has your research to say about that?
Very quickly, we have identified 4 such needs. First of all, it is demand versus supply. In the last 10 years, we had an increase of tourism coming to Greece by 55% increase, and the bed places have increased only by 5%. So there is a gap between demand and supply. The second need is the vacant properties that we have in Greece. In all EU 27, in all 27 members of the European Union, we have the highest percentage of vacant properties in Greece, above 35%, 2.2 million. This is out of any point. And that was data of 2011, based on I think based on the census that was done in 2011. We don't have yet the data of 2021. The third is the cost that it was mentioned by Mr. Paradias. 50% of Greeks this year did not go on summer holidays. Only 10% of Greeks go to hotels when they go on holidays. And 75% of Greeks, actually, when they decide to buy a product or a service, cost is the number one factor. So cost is an important issue to the average household in Greece. And last but not least is the need of using the internet. These digital platforms, collaborative platforms, actually have increased the percentage of Greeks using the internet. And now, the number one category of products or services that Greeks buy online is tourism. So this is also another side effect or need that actually very often we forget, because we're talking about electronic platforms, not face-to-face or whatever sort of transaction.
Thank you very much. And moving back to Mr. Salmena, we heard the minister saying quite a few interesting things. So are you ready to take steps in the direction that the minister discussed in his initial answer regarding regulatory changes in short-term rental framework?
Well, long story short, yes, we are. But I'd like to tell you more about it. Well, as you know, home sharing is a global phenomenon that has helped a lot growing tourism and often leveraging underused real estate assets, as Professor Doukidis just mentioned. We acknowledge that over-tourism can bring challenges to Greece, especially in some geos that could be more affected by this over-tourism, let's say. But we still believe that imposing a limitation to Greek families to casual hosting is not the right way to regulate. So we think that it's important to analyze data, the data we already have through the national registration and even other data that could be used, because we need to understand where potential issues lie and determine what's the best way to address the topic. We think that a potential solution to limit an extreme speculative behavior in Greece could be to set a new definition of what's a business activity, what's a commercial activity. For example, over the second unit rented, so starting from the third one. Because we think that could be translated into additional taxes and revenues for the government, so as the minister said. Airbnb is committed to support the government in this direction, and we are also committed to help the government in introducing a tourist tax at the national level as a percentage of the accommodation price. And we are also committed to help in offer the automatic collective collection and remittance of the tourist tax at the national level to the direct authority, competent authority. We have a huge experience across Europe on this topic because we have several partnerships in place with other governments, and we have already collected and remitted over 315 million euros across Europe. So we know how to do it. We know how to help government in having more revenues that could be used for other issues. For example, to foster tourism or to help the long-term market, for example. So about this, just for this last point, talking about vacant homes, we think that could be helpful to incentivize owners to bring to the long-term market these vacant homes. You know, we think it's a better way to tackle the housing issue than imposing restrictions on casual hosting. So we agree with the minister, with the government, and we are happy and even ready to help the government in doing so.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mr. Paradias, we have already discussed that short-term rentals, and combined with the lack of available properties, have contributed to high prices, especially for rents. We see one-bedroom houses moving to 1,000 euros per month. So is there a sustainable way to combine the current demand with the affordable houses? Or are we moving on a more like a better lucky than good methodology where we see things as they go?
Well, as I said before, if we're looking for what is the cause for this imbalance between offer and demand, we should not be looking into the short-term rentals. Even in places where there is combined demand, like in Chania, by students and by tourists, still the time can be divided between the summer period when the tourists can find shelter and the winter period when the students can do it. And don't underestimate the capability of society to find solutions to these problems. But as I told you, the main reason is that the stock is getting old. There is a phenomenon, international phenomenon, of discouragement of property owners to become landlords. There is so much uncertainty, so much taxation, and so many expenses. That's why people turn into short-term rentals, where they can find solutions, where they can find jobs for their children, where they can pay their taxes, when they can maintain their houses. This is an activity which we must protect and not try to find ways how to suppress it. It's suicidal. It's like shooting our legs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parasias. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, distinguished guests. It was a really insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister.
Yeah.